Kevin was visiting Lily at the hospital when Adriana Wright suddenly called to inform him that something bad had happened to Emo Squire. After skirting around Dorothy, who had been scolding him about handing over all his assets to her and divorcing Lily, he rushed over to another private hospital where Emo was being treated. Adriana then reported that Emo had been found in the suburbs by a passerby next to a dumpster with a gunshot wound to the abdomen. Without any leads on who was behind this, as even his bodyguards had mysteriously disappeared, Kevin wondered where Mitchell Cook and the others were. However, Adriana hadn't informed them yet about this incident. When Kevin heard about this, he was stunned for a moment. Then he immediately came back to his senses. It seemed like whoever did this to Emo Squire was no ordinary person. Currently, it was hard to describe the true situation in Chicago given the ongoing battle between the Foundation and the Pinnacle. But in the corporate world, no one dared to deny that the city's most influential people had been controlled by the Williams Company. This meant that Emo Squire, Gilbert Rhodes, Mitchell Cook, and the others, who were all at the top of the pyramid in their respective industries, didn't just have a good relationship with one another as business allies. Behind the scenes, everyone knew that they were actually both helping and being supported by Kevin. Because of this, Kevin didn't need to ask to know why Emo Squire was attacked again. By now, news of this had spread across the entirety of Chicago, and those who had some power in their hands were all secretly discussing who was suddenly challenging the Williams Company's authority this time. As such, if Mitchell Cook and the others came to the hospital at this time, it would only confirm their suspicions that there was a grave threat, which would have a huge impact on the overall reputation of the Williams Company. "Did you find out who did it?" Kevin almost gritted his teeth when he asked. "Unfortunately, our trail had been cut off, as the person we caught from the surveillance footage was already dead by the time we found him." Adriana Wright shook her head. "Has Emo had any conflicts with anyone recently? Or has he offended anyone in the past who might seek revenge on him?" Kevin's expression became more and more serious. "Give me a list." "Kevin, what are you planning to do?" Adriana asked, puzzled. "Since whoever was behind this doesn't seem to be brave enough to show himself, I can only help Emo by paying them a visit one by one." Kevin clenched his fist tightly, and his eyes flashed a hint of anger. "I have to leave Chicago for some time starting tomorrow. Given this, I don't have much time left, so I need the list in half an hour." "All right." Adriana naturally didn't ask much. Whatever it was, she knew very well that it must be something very urgent for Kevin to leave at this time. While waiting, Kevin sat on a stool and anxiously ran his fingers through his hair as he processed his inner thoughts. Since the people from the Radiance weren't in Chicago yet, he couldn't ask them to help him on the matter. But who could he reach out to without risking the lives of his trusted inner circle? Soon, two people rushed over and handed a list of names to Adriana Wright. After giving it a quick glance, she gave it to Kevin. "I've already reviewed the names on this list. Looks like everyone here has had a business-related conflict with Emo." Although Kevin didn't say anything, the blood vessels on his arms were visibly popping out. And as he reviewed the people on the list, he was familiar with those who were considered to be famous and influential figures in Chicago. However, there were other names that didn't ring a bell, and the reason why they were unfamiliar was because Kevin had never met them before. "Stay here in the hospital and watch over Emo. If anything happens, let me know immediately." Kevin took the list of names and was about to leave. "Kevin, can you really do this all alone?" Adriana asked worriedly. "Don't worry, I've got this covered," Kevin reassured without turning his head. As soon as he walked out of the hospital, Kevin dialed Xavier Marshall's number.
"Kevin, Mr. Williams. It's been a while. Is that really you?"
Xavier Marshall seemed very excited. "Yes, it's me. I need you to prepare a team of at least 10 experts from the Alliance for me as soon as possible. Wait for me at the Archer family's mansion. I'll be there in half an hour." After Kevin instructed him concisely, he hung up the phone. The list of names showed that Dominic Archer and Emo Squire had an intense argument 2 weeks ago. The cause of their dispute was very simple. Emo Squire had robbed Dominic Archer of a piece of commercial land that was being developed in the western part of the city. In addition, Kevin's relationship with Dominic Archer hadn't been very good as of late, especially after their last 2 encounters. Thus, he believed that Dominic had the most motivation among everyone. At the same time, in a mansion on the outskirts of Chicago, Brett Stewart was looking at a few people who were kneeling on the ground. Their bodies were covered in blood, and his eyes were filled with ruthlessness. Shortly after Milton Brown had left along with Viola Garcia and Alan Baker to visit the Alliance's headquarters on his orders, Brett Stewart swiftly took down the most important members of their faction.
Supreme Commander, this is all the evidence of Milton Brown's crimes against the Myriads in recent years.
Roger Knott lowered his head respectfully and handed a report to Brett Stewart.
Just put it down on the table.
Brett Stewart smiled and looked at the people kneeling on the ground in front of him.
You guys are really brave. Do you know who is in charge of the Myriads?
Brett questioned with a stern voice.
We know it's you, Supreme Commander.
The 4 of them trembled and their faces were filled with fear as they responded in unison.
Despite this, you still dared to form your own faction for personal gain? How many benefits did Milton Brown promise for him to convince you to join him? Seems like he doesn't take my position as Supreme Commander seriously enough. And that goes the same for you all.
Brett waved his hand gently, gesturing to the 2 guards beside him.
Take them away and punish them according to the rules of the organization.
Yes, Supreme Commander.
After they lowered their heads respectfully, they walked over to the 4 traitors in large strides. The 2 guards then grabbed their clothes and forcefully dragged them away as they helplessly begged for mercy. When Brett Stewart returned to the study, Roger Knott followed him inside.
Is there anything else?
Brett asked plainly.
Supreme Commander, there's one other thing that you may find very troubling to hear right now. According to our investigation, Milton Brown was also bribed by the boss of the Whistler Hotel, Mitchell Cook, the moment we arrived in Chicago.
Roger's face was still filled with embarrassment. There were some words that he couldn't say out loud.
Why is there a need to report this to me? Isn't it common for big businesses to bribe us to do their dirty work for them?
Brett slightly narrowed his eyes and asked.
Supreme Commander, you may not know about this, but Mitchell Cook is actually part of Kevin's trusted circle. However, now that he is colluded with Milton Brown, he plans to use the Myriad Sutherland family to devour the Williams Company. And that company is one of the properties under the deputy leader's name, Roger revealed.
Brett Stewart's face suddenly turned gloomy when he heard this. At first, he thought that he only had to deal with the fact that Milton Brown was secretly accumulating strength and daring to usurp his position as Supreme Commander of the Myriads. But now, there was an added layer to his problem. Milton had also agreed to destroy the Williams Company for Mitchell Cook, whom Kevin saw as his trusted colleague. The implications of this couldn't help but be thought-provoking.
Does Kevin know about this?
Brett tapped his fingers on the table and gently asked.
It seems that his hands are too full to be aware of this hidden betrayal,
Roger answered with his head lowered.
Go and investigate Mitchell Cook's activities for me.
Brett decided not to tell Kevin for the time being. Everything needed sufficient evidence, especially given his relationship with Mitchell Cook.
I'll work on it right away, Supreme Commander.
Roger nodded and immediately left the study. After getting out of the taxi, Kevin looked at the Archer family's mansion, which was less than 300 feet away from him. Soon after, 2 vans stopped abruptly in front of him, leaving 2 deep skid marks on the ground.
Mr. Williams.
The person in the lead was the Alliance's Xavier Marshall. The others also slightly nodded at Kevin.
What the hell are you all doing? Don't you know who this is? This is the messenger of the Alliance. Why are you all still standing there like statues? Hurry up and kneel down to give him a proper greeting."
Xavier Marshall scolded as he slapped the man who was closest to him on the forehead.
"Greetings, messenger."
More than a dozen people quickly knelt on the ground and lowered their heads before Kevin. "We're all brothers, so there's no need to be like this." Kevin slightly raised his hand and fixed his eyes on Xavier Marshall.
"Don't worry, Mr. Williams. They're all my loyal subordinates. You can trust them to follow your orders as well."
Marshall reassured him. "Follow me," Kevin quickly instructed as they all walked toward the Archer family's mansion. It was currently noon and the outside door was closed. Kevin heard from the taxi driver earlier that the Archer family had no idea what they were going to do next. After their power had sharply shrunk in the past few days, they decided to close themselves off from visitors and live in seclusion. As such, their actions had caused quite a stir in Chicago. Without saying anything, Kevin forcefully kicked his way through 2 thick wooden door panels, instantly breaking them into pieces that flew into the compound. The loud sound of this echoed across the entire Archer family mansion, causing a large number of figures to suddenly rush out. There were more than 100 of them in total. However, Xavier Marshall and his subordinates weren't afraid. They were all trained experts who were ready to fight all year round. And none of this was new to them. "Where is Dominic Archer? Tell him to come out right now." Kevin didn't hesitate and shouted out loud.
"What are you doing here again?"
A man with a knife in his hand asked. Initially, these men were wondering who dared to cause trouble in the Archer family's mansion. And when they saw that it was Kevin, all of them were scared. After all, they clearly remembered what had happened to Jake Morris only a few days ago. "Who are you? Do you think that you're qualified to talk to me? Tell your boss to come out here and show himself." Kevin glanced at him menacingly and sneered to size him up.
"Kevin, why do you have to keep coming back here to cause trouble? You don't take me seriously at all."
An angry voice was heard from inside the mansion. Dominic Archer then walked out to face him. He was breathing heavily as he looked at Kevin with an unfriendly expression and a violent aura. Shortly after arriving at the Archer family's mansion and meeting up with Xavier Marshall, Kevin forcefully kicked the door of the compound. Upon hearing this, they were suddenly surrounded by more than 100 men, who were scared when they saw that Kevin had returned so soon after defeating Jake Morris. After being called out, Dominic Archer then angrily came out of his mansion to confront Kevin. In the past month alone, Kevin and Dalton Steele had already come twice to the Archer family's mansion. Because of them, all the power and prestige that the Archer family had built up in the past had been swiftly crushed under their feet. Up until now, everyone in Chicago was talking about their sudden downfall, and due to their ruined reputation, Dominic Archer had lost almost half of his business partners, with the rest threatening to do the same at any moment. In the past, Dominic Archer definitely wouldn't have swallowed his pride and resentment over a similar situation. However, Kevin and Dalton had shown too much power, which made him unable to resist them at all. And after suffering too many defeats at their hands, Dominic Archer had chosen to close the main entrance of the Archer family's mansion from visitors in order to hide from the public eye. But now that Kevin had once again barged into his home and brought some men along with him, Dominic Archer felt like he had no choice. If he continued to endure this type of humiliation, how could he go on? More specifically, was he still worthy of being the Archer family's boss? "So what if I don't take you seriously?" Kevin asked with a mocking smile.
"Kevin, do you have a death wish or something?"
Dominic Archer clenched his fist so hard that his knuckles cracked. At the same time, the blood vessels on his forehead were visibly showing. "I should be asking you that question. Do you have a death wish? If you really want to die, I can help you with that." Kevin's answer was very straightforward.
What exactly do you want, Kevin? After all, you were the one who came to my place today and forcefully kicked open the door of my home. If you don't give me a good reason, I won't rest until I die with you.
Dominic roared intensely. Last night, Emo Squire was attacked. Not only was he shot, but he was found behind a dumpster, discarded like a piece of trash. Did you do this to him? Kevin shouted back as he gave him a death stare.
You really came all this way just to ask me that?
Dominic Archer scratched his head in puzzlement.
Since you're here in person, I can tell you to your face that the incident has nothing to do with me. You've accused the wrong person.
It's useless to lie about what you've done. 2 weeks ago, you had a business conflict with Emo Squire regarding a piece of commercial land, so you have plenty of motivation to take revenge on him. Kevin stared into his eyes and pointed at him.
Bullshit, Kevin. Don't use this excuse to frame me for something that I didn't do. I admit that we had a dispute, but this matter really has nothing to do with me.
Dominic tried his best to refute Kevin's accusations.
Besides, you should know my character very well by now. If I was the one who did it, Emo Squire wouldn't have just been thrown away in a dumpster like a piece of trash. Do you really think that I would have still given him a chance to live?
Although what you said is plausible, you still have to give me a better explanation. Kevin didn't give in and threatened. Otherwise, the Archer family will be wiped out today. Hearing this, Dominic Archer's men couldn't help but gasp in disbelief. No one dared to doubt the seriousness of Kevin's words because he really had the strength to do so if he wanted to.
You're just using this as an excuse to make a move.
Dominic was so flustered. Is that what you think? Kevin asked in an unreasonable manner. Although his words were quite overbearing, Dominic Archer couldn't do anything to refute them. After all, Kevin had come here to find evidence today. On the surface, it seemed that Dominic Archer was certainly a prime suspect. And with his mind seemingly made up, was there still a way for Dominic to get out of this if Kevin wasn't willing to listen? Given this, Dominic didn't know what to do. When Dominic first met Kevin, he was still known as the useless son-in-law who had been bullied by everyone for the past 3 years. As such, everyone looked down on Kevin, including him. Within the span of a few months, no one could have ever imagined that Kevin was only hiding the truth all this time to keep a low profile. And now that Kevin was no longer afraid to show his true strength, Dominic felt like he had already missed his opportunity to befriend Kevin. At this point, no matter what Dominic did to try to get close to Kevin, he found that it was impossible for him to have the same brotherhood he shared with Dalton Steele. After all, while providing timely help would normally make people feel grateful, his good deeds now wouldn't be enough to curry favor in the eyes of Kevin.
What exactly do you want?
Dominic kept breathing anxiously. What I want is very simple. Either you tell me who did it and hand over the culprit, or I'll use the Archer family as an example to let others see what happens to those who dare to make a move against me. Kevin drew his spiritual energy around him and stomped hard with his foot, causing the ground underneath them to shake.
I already told you that I didn't do it. Why don't you believe me?
Dominic had never been in such a sorry state before. If it wasn't for the fact that he definitely couldn't defeat Kevin in a fight, he would have long ago pounced on him and beaten him to death.
Boss, why are you talking so much nonsense with this kid? There are over 100 of us and about a dozen of them. Let us deal with them accordingly so that the people will no longer dare to say that you become weak.
The person standing beside Dominic Archer waved the sharp blade in his hand. However, as soon as he finished speaking, Kevin suddenly appeared in front of him. Before the man could react, Kevin grabbed him by the shoulder and lifted him up with one hand like a rag doll. Kevin then slapped him hard in the face, sending him flying several feet away before crashing to the ground with a heavy thud. In less than 20 seconds, this trusted subordinate of Dominic Archer had been easily knocked aside by Kevin. With that, Kevin walked toward the man, grabbed his hair, and lifted him up from the ground to face him. "I remember you were the one who dared to speak up to me when I first got here. You're quite the talker, aren't you?" Kevin looked down at him from above. "Can't you see that I was still talking to your boss? What gives a subordinate like you the right to interrupt our conversation? You should take a good look in the mirror and learn to show some respect." Seeing his ruthless actions, the rest of Dominic Archer's men couldn't help but be afraid.
"Kevin, there's no need to harm my men. We can calmly discuss this matter. Just let him go."
Dominic tried to reason with him as he waved his hand to stop his men from approaching Kevin. He knew very well that while his men were more than enough to deal with ordinary people, they would only be rushing to their deaths if they had the boldness to face someone as strong as Kevin. "Actually, I don't want to fight anyone either. It's just that the sound of flies buzzing around makes me feel very irritated," Kevin teased as he lightly shoved away the man in his hands like throwing the trash to the side.
"Just give me some time to investigate this matter so that I can find out what happened."
Dominic took a few deep breaths to calm himself down as much as possible. He had to play his cards right so he couldn't afford to be overwhelmed by his own anger. "I'll give you 3 days. After that, go to the West Chicago International Group's office to find Adriana Wright and tell her everything. Otherwise, if you still can't find who did this, you and everyone in the Archer family should prepare the coffins that you'll be buried in." After saying this, Kevin turned around and left the Archer family's mansion with Xavier Marshall and the rest of his team. In the next 2 hours, Kevin confronted 5 other names from his list. One of them in particular had an arrogant son who was in the middle of a wedding. After lashing out and insulting Kevin for disrupting the ceremony, he was knocked unconscious and sent to the hospital in front of all the guests.
"Mr. Williams, what are we going to do next?"
Xavier Marshall excitedly asked Kevin. Although they barely laid a finger on anyone, following Kevin around and watching him use his words to strike fear in all of these influential figures felt really satisfying. "Do you have a cigarette?" Kevin leaned against the front of the car with a calm expression.
"Here you go, sir."
Marshall quickly took out a pack of cigarettes from his pocket and respectfully gave one to Kevin. "You don't need to be so formal with me. We're old friends after all." Kevin took a deep breath and patted him on the shoulder. "Tomorrow I have to leave Chicago for some time. While I'm gone, bring a few people with you to the West Chicago International Group and look for Adriana Wright. Tell her I sent you." Amidst Dominic Archer's efforts to refute his accusations of attacking Emo Squire, Kevin told him to either hand over the culprit or be used as an example for others who dared to challenge him. When one of Dominic's trusted subordinates offered to deal with Kevin, he was swiftly sent several feet away with a slap. Despite being angered by this, Dominic knew that fighting Kevin would only lead to death. After calmly asking Kevin for some time to investigate, Dominic was given 3 days to report to Adriana Wright. After confronting 5 other names from his list, Kevin asked Xavier Marshall to bring some people to Adriana Wright while he was away from Chicago.
"Mr. Williams, are you asking us to protect her?"
Xavier Marshall asked. "Is there a problem with that?" Kevin took a deep breath and asked without looking back.
Mr. Williams, you might not know this, but there's a rule in the Alliance that only allows us to protect our own people,"
Marshall explained with some difficulty.
"Moreover, I'm sure you're aware of our organization's reputation. If our identities were exposed, the trouble that we'll attract might cause the Alliance to be banned from Chicago."
"Don't overthink it so much. The people that Adriana Wright will ask you to protect are basically all my people. And as the messenger of the Alliance, they're also effectively one of us. It's just that they haven't officially joined the organization yet." Kevin flicked the cigarette in his hand away. Upon going their separate ways, Kevin returned to the hospital and spent the entire afternoon with Lily. Fortunately, Dorothy had also run off somewhere, so he didn't have to deal with her. By the time Kevin was about to leave that night, Dorothy had yet to return. so he could only call to have 2 nurses come to help take care of Lily for him. After leaving the hospital, Kevin chose not to hurry. Instead, he took his time and slowly walked back to the Healing Arts School's Lakeshore base camp. On the way, he thought about a lot of things, but there were many matters that he couldn't resolve in his mind and heart. Tonight was destined to be a sleepless night for many people. After returning to their tent, Dalton and Kevin found some wine and decided to drink to pass the time.
Kevin, what do you think the battle between the Pinnacle and the Foundation will be like tomorrow?
Dalton took a huge gulp of wine and asked. I've never come into contact with anyone from the Pinnacle, so I know nothing about their fighting style. Kevin sighed deeply before continuing. However, during the battle, you and I must try our best to conserve our use of spiritual energy at the beginning. Moreover, we shouldn't trust anyone, including our own teammates. Kevin had already internalized Wayne Ford's advice and prepared an initial strategy for tomorrow. According to him, the most important thing in this battle wasn't to fight to the death against the Pinnacle. Rather, it was to ensure their own survival if they were to win and not lose their lives for the sake of those from the other schools. If Kevin and Dalton managed to succeed with both, then defeating the Pinnacle and becoming the heroes of the Foundation would give them a lofty reputation within the Great Powers. Thus, for those who were participating in this battle, this presented a real challenge. Given that casualties were almost inevitable, it was as if those that would end up losing their lives might as well be struck by an invisible blade from their own teammates. After all, if the Foundation emerged victorious at their expense, who would remember them for it? And with the risk of not being able to reap the benefits, would any of them be willing to sacrifice themselves?
Will we survive?
Dalton stared at him and asked again. What's wrong? Have you already lost your confidence? The battle hasn't even officially begun, Kevin teased with a smile. At that moment, Wayne Ford walked into the tent and was closely followed by Harley Shepard. Wayne Ford's eyes swept across the tent's simple and crude setup. He was the first to speak.
Why are the 2 of you in such a good mood? Are you just interested in drinking and having fun all night? Or are you actually going to prepare for battle?
Do you think we want to? Why don't you announce that Dalton and I don't need to participate in the competition? Then we'll both immediately fall soundly asleep. Kevin rolled his eyes at him unhappily. Suddenly, he seemed to have thought of something. He put down the wine in his hand and stood up in front of them. Anyway, what brings the 2 of you here so late at night? What exactly is this visit for? We've already agreed to go to battle, so I sure hope you came to give the 2 of us something that'll save our lives. Harley Shepard and Wayne Ford looked at each other and couldn't help but laugh. Why are you laughing? If you have something useful, hand it over to us. Don't tell me you want Dalton and me to fight with our bare hands, Kevin urged impatiently. Wayne Ford shook his head lightly and took out a bottle from his pocket. Inside were 4 yellow medicinal pills with colorful patterns on them. What are these? Dean Ford, these better not be some placebos to simply boost our morale. You wouldn't just casually trick us like that, would you? Kevin looked at what Wayne handed over and frowned.
Kid, don't be so ignorant. These are 4 weather pills that can channel the power of wind and lightning to strike your opponents. You only need to throw these pills high up into the clouds to activate them. These can guarantee your survival at a critical moment, so make sure to use them wisely. Wayne then smiled and gave Kevin a light tap on the forehead. Dalton, give me your hand. As your mentor, I also have something to give you. Harley Shepard stroked his beard and looked at Dalton with a serious expression. He brought a pair of hammers from his back. These are fusion hammers. You can use 1 in each hand or combine them into 1 depending upon your need. I obtained this weapon from one of my enemies many years ago, and today I'm giving them to you as a gift, Harley explained.
He then took out 2 pills from his pocket and continued. "And here are 2 pills. The red one is called the Impenetrable Armor Pill. It can help you maintain a state of invincibility for up to 2 hours. However, once that time passes, it can consume your mind and exhaust your body. You must then consume this green revitalizing pill immediately, which will restore all of your bodily functions to normal within 3 minutes." After saying this, Harley stared at Dalton with a complicated expression. He then gently patted his shoulder a few times as the concern he had for Dalton slowly turned into a firm belief in his student. Without waiting for Dalton to thank Harley, Kevin was the first to react. Fusion hammers? Along with an impenetrable armor pill and revitalizing pill? Dean Ford, take a look at his gifts. Those are real things that can save your life. What did you give me? Kevin complained. He felt that the difference between what Wayne Ford and Harley Shepard had given them was significant. Did Wayne not care about him as much as Harley cared about Dalton?
Kid, you're already an herbalist genius with an immense power base. How can you tell me that you still lack medicinal pills? Unlike Dalton, you can always concoct your own.
Wayne looked at him in disbelief.
A young man with talent like yours should have more faith in his abilities.
But still, you need to give me something to help me out, right? Kevin scratched the back of his head and responded, a little embarrassed by this.
Don't worry, Kevin. I still have a powerful fighting technique to bestow upon you guys. It's practically invincible, but not difficult to learn.
Wayne slightly raised his chin and stroked his beard as he looked at them profoundly with his sage-like aura. Why didn't you tell us earlier that you were keeping something like that up your sleeve? Kevin's eyes suddenly grew wide with interest. At the same time, Dalton also seemed very excited. Wayne Ford was a top expert within the Great Powers. To be able to learn an invincible fighting technique from him would definitely give them an enormous leg up.
Actually, this fighting technique is very simple. There's only one sentence to it, so it's not too difficult to understand.
Wayne looked at them seriously and uttered,
"If you can't beat them, run away as fast as you can."
Kevin and Dalton were dumbfounded when they heard this. Meanwhile, Harley Shepard couldn't help but smile and shake his head. This was indeed an invincible fighting technique.
All right. You two should stop drinking and get some rest tonight. There are important things to deal with tomorrow,
Wayne remarked in a low voice. He then left the tent with Harley. When Kevin finally regained his senses, he was so angry that he wanted to throw the wine bottle on the ground. However, when he lifted it up and realized that there was still some wine inside, he couldn't help but gently put it back on the table. I should have known better than to trust that old man. He got my hopes up for nothing with that fighting technique. Kevin drank a mouthful of wine grumpily.
Kevin, don't talk about him like that. Deep down, I think the two deans actually cared quite a lot about you.
Dalton was so happy that he couldn't even sit still. As he looked at the pair of fusion hammers in his hands, his heart was about to burst with joy. Well, what did Harley give you again? Why don't you test those hammers out? You don't want to let that old man fool you too, Kevin warned. It's better to see if they really work or not in advance so you'll be prepared to use them.
My mentor wouldn't lie to me.
Dalton had just said this, but deep down he had to admit that he was worried. He gently threw the pair of hammers on the ground and silently hoped that he was right. A second later, the two objects instantly fused into one giant hammer in the middle of the air. When Dalton grabbed the hammer and forcefully smashed it onto the ground, it immediately created a deep pit. Feeling the earth shaking underneath them, Kevin then circulated his spiritual energy around his hand and picked up the copper hammer from the ground. What a hell of a weapon! Any expert below level 5 wouldn't be able to withstand a single blow from this. Kevin couldn't help but exclaim. Dalton reached out his hand and took the fusion hammer from Kevin. He then waved it around a few times before separating them back into 2 pieces to practice with both of his hands.
Kevin, I can't wait any longer for tomorrow's battle.
Dalton couldn't contain his excitement. While Kevin and Dalton were drinking some wine in their tent, Wayne Ford and Harley Shepard suddenly entered to give them items that they could use in battle. After complaining about receiving less than Dalton, Wayne got Kevin's hopes up with an invincible fighting technique. However, this turned out to be a joke that left Kevin and Dalton dumbfounded. After the two deans left, Kevin grumpily remarked that he shouldn't have trusted Wayne. And when Dalton tried to reassure him otherwise, Kevin told him not to be so trusting of Harley either, and to test whether his fusion hammers actually worked. Upon seeing that they did, Dalton couldn't contain his excitement for tomorrow's battle. However, Kevin didn't feel happy about this at all. The fact that Wayne Ford and Harley Shepard had brought such precious items indicated that they had a slim chance of survival in this battle. Unfortunately, Dalton wasn't knowledgeable enough about ancient weapons and herbal pills to realize this. Looking at the weather pills in his hand, Kevin recalled reading about it in the secret book, which contained very detailed records of everything in almost every field. Although he hadn't completely learned all the information in it, he knew that the weather pills formula had been lost many years ago. As such, these pills were probably worth at least tens of millions of dollars if they were ever sold at an auction. Moreover, given that these could only be used once, how would they ever be replaced without the pill recipe? As for the impenetrable armor pill and the revitalizing pill, although Kevin was known as a master in herbalism, the degree of difficulty in concocting a single pill of either one was so high that he might not succeed even if he spent his entire life trying to do so. Because of this, both supreme-grade medicinal pills were practically impossible to find now. Dalton, I don't think we'll be getting much rest tonight. Please guard me while I refine some pills overnight. After Kevin finished his glass of wine, he then walked across to the other side of the tent and uncovered the pill furnace. After that, he took out many precious herbs from his suitcase to start refining pills. For Chicago's ordinary citizens, there was nothing special about tonight. Thus, they could all sleep soundly thinking that tomorrow would just be another day on the calendar. Meanwhile, the Foundation's experts, who were secretly guarding the lakeshore to protect the rest of the city, found themselves restless and unable to sleep, knowing what was about to come in just a couple of hours. Early the next morning, the entire camp of the Foundation started moving. Under the escort of numerous elite experts, 50 young warriors slowly marched toward a couple of submarines along their defensive line. At the same time, several submarines had resurfaced on the lake. Standing on top of them were 50 representatives from the Pinnacle, who were led by 3 middle-aged men with auras as deep as the abyss. Kevin, who was standing in the middle of the group, kept looking at the people on the Pinnacle's side. They all looked like hungry wolves who were ready to hunt for some prey and crush everything in their path. Upon seeing this, many of Kevin's teammates couldn't help but turn pale, especially those who had a low power base. They even started to have second thoughts about participating in the battle. Wayne Ford had gone ahead to address the Pinnacle's representatives before the battle, and he was currently less than 10 feet away from them. With just his powerful aura alone, no one from the Pinnacle's army dared to launch a surprise attack on him at the moment.
Are you the commander of the Foundation?
One of the 3 middle-aged leaders from Pinnacle's side spoke in a calm and composed manner.
There's no need for any pleasantries. Let's discuss the rules and parameters of this battle clearly before we begin.
Wayne Ford replied, getting straight to the point.
All right then. Both sides will send 50 people to battle in an independent space on the lake. Rest assured, the Pinnacle didn't set up any traps out there, so you don't have to worry about us ambushing your warriors.
After saying that, the man suddenly paused and smiled before continuing.
I know it's hard to believe, but we wouldn't do such a despicable thing. In fact, the reason why we chose this kind of arrangement is to minimize the number of casualties on both sides as much as possible.
It seems as though the pinnacle isn't invincible after all,
Wayne remarked in a cold voice. The two of them talked for nearly half an hour before they returned to their respective camps. Wayne looked at Kevin and the others with a complicated expression.
Originally, this war didn't involve you all because the senior members of the Foundation agreed that it was too dangerous to put your lives at risk. However, after days of endless bloodshed on both sides, both the Foundation and the Pinnacle have agreed to let the younger generation decide the outcome of this war once and for all.
Wayne continued.
With the enemy in front of us, I don't care how deep the hatred is between our schools. All 50 of you have to find a way to coexist and work together. After all, you represent the hope and future of the Foundation. As such, it's more important for you all to come back alive than anything else.
The meaning behind these words was thought-provoking, and some of the warriors couldn't help but get teary-eyed with Wayne Ford's impassioned speech. After explaining the rules and parameters of their battle, both parties used their respective submarines to reach their meeting point. The independent space that had been scouted by the Pinnacle was an artificially constructed island that could only accommodate 100 people. Upon arriving, everyone was given a map of the island to help them navigate it. According to Wayne Ford, in order to ensure that the battle would be competitive, anyone who stayed along the exterior for more than a few minutes would be attacked from outside, regardless of which side they belonged to. Given this, the closer one was to the center of the island, the safer they would be. With various cameras set up throughout the island, the Foundation could monitor what was happening from their base camp. With this, the leaders of the different schools all gathered in the main tent as they watched several angles of the islands being displayed through a giant monitor. As soon as the final person had set foot on the island, a voice announced,
Attention everyone. Using your maps, choose your starting position for the battle. Whatever it is, you have exactly 1 minute to get there. Best of luck to everyone. Your 1 minute begins now.
With that, Dalton immediately nudged Kevin.
Where do you think we should go?
Give me a few seconds to decide. Kevin quickly scanned through the different markings on the map. I got it. Just trust me on this. Kevin suddenly grabbed Dalton's arm and they ran as fast as they could. When they finally stopped, they seemed to be near the shore of the island, surrounded by water. However, there were no longer any submarines in front of them.
Where are we, Kevin?
Dalton said as he tried to catch his breath while he looked around blankly and scratched his head. I chose the southeast corner of the map, Kevin replied as he found a rock and sat down.
What's the use of us being here?
Dalton asked, still puzzled.
Are you sure it's safe for us to stay by the shore?
Can you sit down and just listen to me first? Kevin put his hands on his knees and gazed far into the horizon with the calm ocean breeze blowing on his face. At the same time, after Wayne Ford and Harley Shepard had witnessed everyone settling down at their chosen starting positions, they turned their eyes to see where Kevin and Dalton were.
Didn't they say that the closer they were to the center of the island, the safer they would be? Why did the two of them just run to a corner of the island? Did they have a death wish or something?
Harley had a slight frown on his face.
What a smart kid. He's proving himself worthy of the Night King's trust so far,
Wayne Ford praised in a low voice. The leaders from the other schools were naturally too fixated on the situation of their respective students, so none of them overheard the conversation between Wayne and Harley.
What's going on? Am I missing something?
Harley became somewhat anxious.
Look at the others, especially the representatives of the Pinnacle. How many of them chose to immediately rush toward the center of the island?
Wayne casually pointed out.
Although the center is said to be the safest place that they can go, it's also the most dangerous place to be at the very beginning. With so many people concentrated there, it leaves them vulnerable to being attacked right away. Meanwhile, Kevin chose to start as far away from it as possible and in a place that no one would think to look. Although he and Dalton will have to eventually rush to the center, they can preserve their strength for now and let things play out between the others first.
Back on the island, Kevin had just explained his strategy, and only then did Dalton understand what he was thinking.
Are you saying that we should just wait and hide here first while letting them fight amongst themselves? If we only go in when both sides are injured, won't that be taking advantage of them?
Dalton felt somewhat conflicted about Kevin's plan. Dalton, everything is a fair game out here, so there's no deception in war. Although this strategy may sound a bit cheap, you have to remember that this isn't the time to let your emotions affect your decisions, Kevin replied faintly. As the saying goes, work smarter, not harder.
I understand the logic, but don't you feel like you're missing out? After receiving Vice President Shepard's gifts last night, I suddenly felt excited to use them in battle. But now I can't help but feel frustrated that we're just sitting on the sidelines.
Dalton curled his lips, still unwilling to support Kevin on the strategy. Dalton, you'd better wake up. Don't forget the reason for this battle. If we really want a fighting chance to defeat the Pinnacle while staying alive, we'll have to stay patient and wait for the right time to strike. Don't worry, you'll get your chance to use your new weapons, Kevin said as he relaxed on the rock and seemed to leisurely enjoy his surroundings. Upon hearing this, Dalton didn't say anything. He quickly took out a cigarette from his pocket and lit it up. When others at the Foundation's camp noticed their actions, they were in utter disbelief. Were these guys really planning to compete? They looked like they were on vacation. About 10 minutes later, Kevin stretched his body comfortably and patted Dalton on the shoulder. He had fallen asleep out of boredom soon after smoking his cigarette. Wake up, Dalton. It's time for us to make our way to the center of the island. Kevin sighed with some regret as he took one last look at the water before him.
What? I thought we weren't going there for a while.
Dalton rubbed his eyes. Didn't Wayne Ford tell us that we couldn't stay in the outer areas for too long? Otherwise, we'll... Kevin stopped mid-sentence as a dark ray of light that covered the sky slowly approached them. Run! Kevin immediately realized that they were already being attacked from outside. When Dalton looked up, his survival instinct suddenly kicked in as well as he and Kevin started running for their lives. While running for what felt like an hour, they passed by several places that had traces of bloodshed along the way. Needless to say, the intense battle had already begun. All right, we can take a break now. Kevin was breathing heavily. Seeing that they were no longer being attacked, he figured that they could rest here for the time being.
I'm so tired,
Dalton gasped as he sat down on the ground and tried to catch his breath. At that moment, in another part of the island, Calvin Morris had just killed 2 members of the Pinnacle with a single sword strike. Beside him stood 4 of his subordinates from the Morris family.
Search the island immediately for any blind spots. It's rare to find a spot where no one from the Foundation can keep an eye on us. We must find Kevin and get rid of him when the time comes, Calvin said as he sheathed his sword with force. Yes, sir,
the other 4 answered respectfully in unison. Meanwhile, Clarissa Pratt, Clyde Davis, and Sebastian Young were all standing less than 30 feet away from Kevin and Dalton. After spending the first 10 minutes of the battle by the shore letting the rest of the warriors fight each other at the center of the island, Dalton had fallen asleep out of boredom. Just as Kevin woke him up, since they couldn't stay in the outer areas for too long, they suddenly had to run for their lives after being attacked from outside. In another part of the island, Calvin Morris instructed his men to search for blind spots where they could eventually get rid of Kevin without the Foundation knowing. Meanwhile, Clarissa Pratt, Clyde Davis, and Sebastian Young spotted Kevin and Dalton, who had just taken a break after a lot of running.
I thought only the 3 of us were smart enough to avoid rushing toward the center of the island at the start of the battle. Looks like Kevin had the same idea,
Sebastian Young told the other 2 with a smile. He then nodded at Kevin as they approached him and Dalton. "What's the matter with the three of you? Are you here to kill us?" Kevin replied coldly. The deans of the Central Alternative Healing Academy and the Southeast School for Natural Medicine, where Clarissa Pratt and Clyde Davis came from, both had a bad relationship with him. Moreover, Kevin had also previously defeated them at the Healing Arts School's martial arts competition, including the Southwest School of Healing Sebastian Young, who was personally trained by Wayne Ford. Despite this, Kevin had made his decision last night. As long as he wasn't in a life-threatening situation, he would never attack the people of the Foundation, including Calvin Morris. After all, the Foundation would have a higher chance of winning if more of them survived and they stuck together. "Kevin, you don't have to be so nervous. During the competition, each of us had an obligation to serve our own deans to represent each of our schools. But now we must prioritize thinking about the future of the Foundation. We should help each other and work together so we can survive and emerge victorious." Clarissa Pratt's words hit the nail on the head as she tried to show Kevin that she was speaking from the heart.
"How can you guys be so kind to us all of a sudden?"
Dalton snorted in disdain.
"We're aware that we've had our differences."
Clyde Davis crossed his arms in front of his chest.
"But now is a special time. Instead of holding grudges over conflicts from the past, we must set aside our differences and work toward our common goal of defeating the Pinnacle. If there really is a score to settle, we can just find another time and place to fight after we win this battle."
In fact, ever since the three of them had set foot on this island and the battle had started, they had been constantly looking for Kevin. Last night, Paul Vaughn, Jeffrey Bowie, and Wayne Ford had all said the same thing to them. If they wanted to survive the battle, the best strategy would be to team up with Kevin. Although they may not agree, they couldn't disobey their orders. And since the three of them were actually close anyway, they chose to stick together as a group from the very beginning. "Are you saying that you want to form an alliance?" Kevin raised his eyebrows and asked. Deep down, he really didn't think that he could trust these three people. However, with a much bigger enemy before them, he had to be open to the idea of working together with them. Besides, in case they decided to betray him later on, he figured that although Sebastian Young and the others were all level 5 experts, he was confident that they could still be defeated with one hand, whether by him or Dalton.
"Kevin, I know you're a smart man. By now, you should have already guessed what the Pinnacle is trying to do. By causing panic and trying to separate us at the start of the battle, they'll be able to defeat us one by one. Instead of giving them what they want, the 5 of us should join forces and lead the Foundation to victory. What do you say?"
Sebastian's tone was rather calm, as if he wasn't in a hurry to get an answer from Kevin. In any case, as long as they stayed together, regardless of whether they really formed an official alliance or not, the people of the Pinnacle wouldn't easily be able to pick them off one by one as they planned. "But why should I trust you? How can I be sure that you won't eventually try to stab me in the back?" Kevin kept looking at the three of them vigilantly. Up until now, he had no reason to suspect any hidden motives from them. Sebastian and the other two didn't take out their weapons, and there were no obvious shifts in their body language. As such, Kevin knew very well that they were loyal to Paul Vaughn, Jeffrey Bowie, and Wayne Ford. However, after everything that the three leaders had done to him, this was also the reason why he couldn't afford to trust them completely.
"Kevin, you don't have to trust us, but your best option right now is to cooperate with us. After all, this is the only way you can survive."
Sebastian offered a faint smile as he played with the ring on his finger.
"Aside from that, given what's at stake here, I'm sure that you don't want to see the Pinnacle win, right?"
"How will we work together then? Should we fight on our own and help each other as needed? Or should the 5 of us stick together the entire time?" Kevin wasn't in such high spirits when he said this.
"Of course, we should choose the latter. The probability of being attacked on our own is too high,"
Sebastian replied without hesitation.
"No matter what kind of difficulties we'll encounter along the way, it's better to face them together, don't you think?"
Just as the 5 of them had reached an agreement, a violent gust of wind suddenly came from the east. Upon regaining their balance, Dalton and Clyde turned to the side at the same time. They then strode forward and sent back a strong wave of spiritual energy with their palms. "Who's hiding over there? Show yourselves!" Clyde roared angrily.
3 of them are early-stage level 5 experts, while the other 2 are more advanced than that. Seems like we've come across the strongest group in the Foundation this time.
After the cold voice was heard, 5 figures quickly appeared in front of Kevin and the others. These 5 people were all wearing matching green uniforms, and their eyes and hair were slightly purple in color. Judging from the spiritual energy fluctuations coming from their bodies, 3 of them were late-stage level 5 experts, and the other 2 were just a notch below that. "Are you Apex Islanders?" Clarissa's facial expression became serious as she waved her right hand and took out her sword from her waist.
"How dare you call us by the name of our island?"
The leader of the group slowly took a few steps forward. With a face full of disdain, he arrogantly puffed his chest out and declared,
"Under the leadership of the mighty Pinnacle, it'll only be a matter of time before our forces will be able to defeat the Foundation. Then we shall unify the world under our control, and all of you will be my personal slaves."
"Who the hell do you think you are?"
Dalton's temper instantly exploded. But just as he was about to step forward and dare them to fight, Kevin pressed down on his shoulder to stop him. "Has anyone ever told you that you really deserve to be beaten up?" As Kevin spoke, he secretly observed these people. "The strength of our people may not be as strong as yours, but unfortunately for you, we enjoy our freedom too much to let anyone take that away from us. Besides, do you really think that a bunch of trash like you are superior to us?" Hearing this, the anger in the hearts of Clarissa Pratt and the others immediately lessened. The leader of the 5 figures seethed in anger.
"What did you just call us? A small ant like you had better—"
"If we're ants, then what are you?" Kevin forcefully interrupted him. "Leftover food in the fridge? Rotten fish in the market? Or perhaps weeds that grow out from between the cracks in stone?"
"How dare you? You're going to die for your insults."
The leader of the 5 figures suddenly stomped his foot forcefully on the ground.
"At first, I wanted to let you live for a few more minutes to give you some time to think of your last words, but it seems like you don't deserve that luxury anymore."
The other 4 figures from the Pinnacle simply stood still behind him with their hands held in front of their chests, as if they were watching a show.
"Before you die today, my name is Parker Ramirez. I hope you remember it in your final moments."
After saying this, Parker Ramirez suddenly shot out and waved his right hand into the air. Even though he was still a long distance away from him, Kevin could feel another violent gust of wind blowing against his face. How could this be? Kevin quickly walked back 30 feet to stand beside the others. "Let me teach this guy a lesson." Clyde Davis excitedly stepped forward. For someone like him, fighting was perhaps his greatest joy in life. With that, Clyde jumped up high into the air and rushed toward Parker Ramirez, choosing to engage him in close combat. A loud bang was instantly heard as the shoulders of the 2 men collided. As waves of energy rippled in the air, the trees around them were violently shaken by this powerful force. Moreover, Clyde Davis and Parker Ramirez were enveloped in a cloud of debris. Once it finally cleared, everyone else could see that half of their legs had sunk into the ground. When they managed to step out of this and regain their footing, they both fiercely punched each other. This time, however, Parker Ramirez's punch landed first, causing Clyde to take more than 10 steps back after being hit in the stomach. He then looked at Parker Ramirez with a face full of shock. How could he, who was so good at close combat, actually be at a disadvantage this time? Of course, Clyde didn't want to accept this fact. He then patted his chest and, like a frenzied gorilla, pounced toward Parker once again.
Kevin, did you notice anything special with Parker's style of attack?
Sebastian Young, who was equally puzzled by this, suddenly asked. There is one thing, Kevin uttered modestly.
Kevin, what did you see?
Dalton asked in confusion.
Why does he seem to have an endless supply of spiritual energy? He's obviously not as strong as someone like Wayne Ford or Jeffrey Bowie.
Have you noticed the other 4 figures just standing behind him? Kevin narrowed his eyes and said, Every time Clyde attacks, strong ripples of energy appear in the air. However, with his strength alone, it shouldn't be enough to shake our surroundings nearly this much.
What's your point, Kevin? How does he do it then?
Dalton scratched the back of his head. It's because every time he attacks, he doesn't rely on just his own strength to fight Clyde. Instead, he actually draws from the collective spiritual energy of the other 4, allowing him to spread their strength in all directions and overwhelm Clyde. At this point, Kevin frowned and added, I've never heard of such a unique way of fighting. However, there was something else that he didn't say. Although Clyde was already starting to get frustrated, Parker wasn't even trying yet, and it wouldn't be long before they would see Clyde lose to him miserably.
If I can't even take care of a piece of scum like you, then I don't deserve to come back from this island alive.
Clyde kicked Parker's arm away and jumped into the air. As he rapidly sent a spinning kick toward Parker Ramirez, his body emitted a faint golden light. Despite his reservations about trusting Sebastian Young, Clarissa Pratt, and Clyde Davis, Kevin eventually agreed to work together with them along with Dalton Steele to survive and defeat the Pinnacle. Just as they had come to an agreement, they were suddenly attacked by 5 figures from the Pinnacle who were led by Parker Ramirez. After a brief exchange of insults, Clyde Davis stepped forward to engage Parker in close combat. However, it didn't take long before Kevin noticed that Parker was drawing spiritual energy from the other 4 figures, using their collective strength. Unwilling to accept defeat, Clyde sent a spinning kick toward Parker. However, Kevin could tell that Parker was just getting started. Clyde is going to lose, Kevin sighed regretfully.
What? How can you say that so definitively? It looks like he can go toe-to-toe with him so far,
Dalton said in confusion.
Although Clyde's moves look aggressive, he won't have the strength to fight back if Parker took him seriously enough.
Sebastian Young understood and agreed with Kevin's prediction. As the 3 of them were discussing, Clyde was throwing everything he had at his opponent. However, Parker seemed completely unfazed by this. Instead of choosing to retreat or show any visible signs of panic, there was actually a mocking smile on his face. Just as Clyde's leg was about to hit him, Parker calmly raised his hands. Then, like catching cotton in his hands, he caught Clyde's foot and forcefully slammed him onto the ground. Although Parker remained unaffected by all of this, the ground underneath them violently shook from the impact. That's impossible. Clarissa's pupils suddenly widened in shock. Since Paul Vaughn and Jeffrey Bowie were old friends, the Central Alternative Healing Academy had always had a good relationship with the Southeast School for Natural Medicine. As such, she and Clyde were also quite close, as the 2 of them often sparred and knew each other's skills very well. Given this, Clarissa had never seen anyone who could take Clyde's attack head-on. Even Kevin, who had previously defeated him at the martial arts competition, had to use extraordinary measures to do so. Just as I predicted, Kevin remarked as he paid close attention to all of Parker Ramirez's movements.
Using a group's collective spiritual energy to counterattack. This ancient technique hasn't been seen within the great powers in many years.
Sebastian's brows were knitted together upon witnessing this scene.
Did you feel the difference? A small ant like you doesn't stand a chance against me.
Parker laughed mockingly. Clyde couldn't say anything. Despite normally being able to withstand extreme pain as a defensive master of the iron wall technique, he felt as if his entire body had been shattered into pieces, and all of the spiritual energy flowing through his veins earlier had been used up, rendering him unable to attack or defend any longer. I was originally planning to take my time playing around with you guys. Unfortunately, this arrogant piece of trash jumped at me too quickly and ruined my mood. Thus, he'll have to pay the price as compensation. Parker cracked his knuckles and walked over to him. He then grabbed Clyde's wrist to lift him up above his head before ruthlessly throwing him back onto the ground. Upon impact, the strong rebounding force caused Clyde to spit out a mouthful of blood. Left in a daze by this, Parker Ramirez then pulled Clyde Davis up and positioned his body to stand helplessly in front of him. It's my turn to kick you now. Parker raised his right foot and kicked Clyde in the chest with a spinning kick of his own, sending him flying far away before crashing into a large rock. Clyde! Clarissa ran up to him with concern and helped him up from the ground. He's too powerful. Clyde's face had turned pale as he spat out another mouthful of blood and fainted. Is the Foundation really this pathetic? How dare you call yourself a top expert of the new generation with such little ability? What a disgrace. Parker put his hands on his waist and sneered at them with a face full of disdain. Parker, don't kill all of them. Leave one or two for us to play with. After all, you can't have all the fun, can you? One of the women standing behind him quipped as she looked at Kevin and the others with eyes full of ridicule. Surrender now and kneel down in front of us. Although we can't spare your lives, we can still let you experience some thrill and excitement before you all inevitably die. Another woman added. The two of them were twin sisters named Alicia and Kayla Miller.
Damn it, I'll deal with the both of them.
Dalton Steele clenched his fists and roared in anger at them. Dalton, don't be impulsive. Kevin blocked his way just as he was about to charge at them.
Kevin, how can you still tolerate being insulted like this?
Dalton asked angrily. At the same time, Sebastian's face also conveyed a sense of helplessness. The way Parker fought Clyde was completely different from anything that he had encountered before. It was like fighting 5 level 5 experts at once.
Kevin, what do you think we should do?
Sebastian turned his head and asked. He did this for 2 particular reasons. Firstly, he knew that Kevin's overall strength was indeed much stronger than theirs, and in the face of a great enemy, they needed a backbone. Aside from that, Sebastian also wanted to make use of this opportunity to find out more about him. If you think you can fight them, then I have no objections if you want to do so. Otherwise, if you can't beat them, then find an opportunity to escape. Kevin shrugged his shoulders and put on an indifferent look. Anyway, wasn't this the invincible secret technique that Wayne Ford had taught them before? Since he couldn't defeat them, he had to run away as soon as possible. After all, he had no idea how to fight these people of the Pinnacle. And without knowing whether Sebastian Young and the others would help him or simply watch him fight, it wasn't worth the risk. Besides, if these 5 were already going to be a problem, how much stronger were the higher-ups of the Pinnacle who wanted to kill him? He had to look at things from a bigger picture and choose his battles wisely. Dalton, get ready to run. Kevin really didn't have any intention of fighting.
Kevin, what did you say?
Dalton was stunned. Why aren't you ants attacking anymore? Let's resume this fight so that I can enjoy myself while I take you all out one by one. Don't tell me that you're just a bunch of cowards. Parker spat on the ground. It's useless for you to keep resisting. Just come closer and surrender already. Alicia Miller tried to beckon them.
I can't take this anymore. Kevin, please let me go so I can fight them.
Dalton kept trying to break free from Kevin's arm. Dalton, Can you calm down? Now is not the time to let your pride get in the way, so don't listen to their insults. Kevin grabbed his shoulder tightly. It's useless to waste your energy here on these nobodies. There are plenty of other chances to fight more meaningful opponents once we're able to regroup.
What you say makes sense.
Sebastian thought about it and nodded in agreement. Given that they had just entered the island about an hour ago, there were still many more powerful opponents that they had yet to meet. Thus, it was not optimal to waste their time and effort here as it could cost them later on. As Clarissa brought Clyde over back to their side, Kevin gave Sebastian Young a knowing look and slowly walked forward. Why don't you stop talking so much nonsense? Kevin took a deep breath and continued. You said that you wanted to have a fair fight, right? Today, I shall give you one. Parker Ramirez's expression slowly became more serious. He could feel that Kevin's power base was the highest among the five of them. Because of this, he had been on guard against him all this time. Kevin slowly waved his hands to wrap his entire body with a spiritual energy. Seeing waves of energy rippling in the air, Parker and the others suddenly prepared themselves, thinking that Kevin was about to make a big move on them. With a loud bang, Kevin punched his fist into the ground with an incredible amount of force. In an instant, clouds of dust flew everywhere, and Parker's line of sight was completely compromised.
Everyone, stay close and get ready to defend yourselves against their sneak attack,
Parker ordered loudly. The five of them immediately gathered together in a circle and looked around in all directions vigilantly. When most of the dust had dispersed, more than 10 other figures appeared out of nowhere and rushed onto the scene. There was no doubt that they were all from the Pinnacle, and they were attracted by the noise that Kevin had made. Where are they? Kayla Miller asked curiously.
Damn ants! We've been tricked!
Parker clenched his fist tightly. At the same time, Kevin and the others were moving swiftly through the dense forest, running as far away from where they were after his strategic diversion.
We should be safe here for now. Kevin, why don't we settle down and find a place to rest so you can take a look at Clyde's condition?
Sebastian Young suggested while breathing heavily. You're right. Anyway, we've been running for more than 10 minutes already, so I think we've created enough separation to stop and take a breather. Kevin nodded slightly and motioned for them to lay Clyde down on the ground. At the moment, Clyde was in bad shape. His face was extremely pale and he seemed to be drifting in and out of consciousness. 3 of his ribs are broken and his fight with Parker consumed so much of the spiritual energy that he fell unconscious, Clarissa Pratt pointed out as she checked on him.
How can that be? Parker didn't even do much against him during their fight, Dalton remembered with some confusion.
That's just what you saw. Kevin quickly recalled the scene of their fierce battle. Remember that Parker Ramirez was able to harness the collective spiritual energy from his group of level 5 experts. This allowed him to deliver each strike with so much force that it was enough to deal exponentially more damage to Clyde's body, with only a few moves than he otherwise would have been able to inflict. What should we do? Clyde obviously won't be able to help us fight off the Pinnacle if he stays like this. Clarissa withdrew her hand from Clyde's body and anxiously sighed. I would do anything for some medicinal pills that could heal him in no time.
Kevin, aren't you an herbalist expert as well?
Sebastian suddenly turned to Kevin and asked. After Clyde Davis was easily defeated by Parker Ramirez, Dalton wanted to charge at them before being stopped by Kevin. Following Wayne Ford's advice, he suggested that they should run away instead. With much more powerful opponents ahead of them, they had to choose their battles wisely to conserve their energy. Given this, Kevin dared Parker and the others to fight, only to use this as a diversion for them to escape. Amidst Clarissa Pratt's worries that Clyde wouldn't be able to fight the Pinnacle without any medicinal pills to heal his injuries, Sebastian suddenly brought up the fact that Kevin was an herbalism expert. That's right. Kevin, do you have any medicinal pills that can help Clyde? Clarissa Pratt eagerly asked him as she stood up from the ground.
Now that the enemy is in front of us, Clyde's combat strength is indispensable, Kevin. I know that you're also a man with foresight. Don't tell me you don't understand the logic and urgency behind our need for your expertise given this situation.
Sebastian Young continued to stare into his eyes with a soft smile. Even under such circumstances, Sebastian's charismatic personality could still persuade others into agreeing with his opinions. Even Kevin couldn't help but pay close attention to him when he spoke.
I finally understand now. You wanted to team up with Kevin from the very beginning, not because of his strength, but because all of you wanted to use his skills as an herbalism expert. Am I right?
Dalton suddenly jumped up and scolded loudly. Facing such an accusation, Clarissa avoided his gaze and slowly squatted down again to check Clyde's injuries. Meanwhile, Sebastian simply smiled and shook his head a few times without saying anything either.
Why aren't the two of you talking? Didn't you hear my question? Have both of you suddenly gone mute or something?
Dalton kept looking at the two of them with furrowed eyebrows.
Dalton, don't be so overbearing. There's nothing to hide here. After all, it's no big secret that the three of us are each descendant of a distinguished line of warriors from our respective schools. And as legacy experts with years of training, our background and status are currently much higher than yours within the great powers.
Sebastian turned to Kevin and explained.
To be honest, I'm surprised as well with how far you've come, Kevin. As an ordinary citizen with no prior knowledge of herbalism, you've achieved such great feats with less than a year of training, and you've clearly caught Wainford's eye.
With his hands behind his back, Sebastian paced back and forth for a while before he continued.
Kevin's current situation is very clear. While no one can deny that he's an extraordinary talent, it's impossible for the two of you to last until the end without relying on us. What the hell are you trying to imply? Are you saying that we're too weak to defend ourselves in battle?
Dalton rolled up his sleeves and stood right in front of Sebastian.
Don't you know that both of us have a higher power base than any of the three of you?
Dalton's temper instantly flared up.
Since you all think you're so capable, then let's part ways here. I hope to see you guys alive at the very end. Split up? What right do you have to dictate such a thing? Don't be so selfish.
Sebastian snorted and glanced at Dalton.
Let me remind you of something. The moment you stepped onto this island, you no longer just represent yourself. And with the outcome of this battle deciding the rise or fall of the entire Foundation, can you afford to bear that responsibility on your shoulders alone?
Dalton clenched his fist tightly.
Don't think I won't dare to attack you.
Why don't you try? You may have a slightly stronger power base, but without enough combat training and experience, you'll surely humiliate yourself against any of us. Sebastian raised his eyebrows, then turned his head back to address Kevin.
Kevin, I'm sure you understand the current situation at hand. Given how dangerous this battle is and knowing what's at stake, the last thing we need is to fight amongst ourselves. Instead, we need you to provide us with all the pills that we'll require to ensure our survival.
Sebastian continued.
When we win this battle, Clarissa, Clyde, and I won't take all the credit for it. Instead, all 5 of us will be considered the greatest contributors to the Foundation, and no one will treat you as anything less than a hero, ever again.
Before Kevin could say anything, Clarissa suddenly added, We've investigated your background. You were once expelled from the Williams family in New York. But don't worry. As long as you cooperate with our arrangement, you'll never have to worry about that again. Just as Dalton was about to make a move, Kevin, who had been silent all this time, finally spoke. I understand what both of you are saying. With the support of the 3 major schools, I'll be set for life. Dalton froze on the spot when he heard this. He then stared at Kevin blankly. As far as he knew, Kevin was definitely not a person who would be blinded by such material benefits. At the same time, Clarissa Pratt and Sebastian Young were also stunned, but they quickly regained their senses and revealed a knowing smile on their faces. As she gave Dalton a subtle side glance, Clarissa slyly quipped, "Talking to smart people is definitely much easier than communicating with some selfish hothead. As long as the three of us are here to have your back, the Williams family in New York will be the least of your concerns. Sebastian took Clarissa's words and continued to speak with confidence and assurance. "You can start your own family dynasty in Washington, D.C., and when the time comes, you can trample all those people who looked down on you in the past." Dalton was in disbelief.
"Kevin, you..."
Kevin smiled and waved his hand at Dalton, signaling him not to be so nervous. He then looked at Clarissa and Sebastian as if he was staring at two fools. "Before we continue, I want to ask you something. Why are the two of you looking down on me so much? Do you really think that I'm just an herbalist expert? Did the leaders of your schools put you up to this?" Kevin asked in a low voice, "Do you know what happens to people who insult me?" The atmosphere instantly turned cold when he said this. The smiles on Sebastian and Clarissa's faces quickly disappeared and turned serious. "Do you know what you're saying?" Sebastian slightly narrowed his eyes and raised his chin to size up Kevin. "I'm well aware of it, but let me ask you the same question. Do you know what you're doing?" Kevin asked with a straight face. "Kevin, we're in the middle of a high-stakes battle. I'm sure you know that you don't have any better options right now, so let's set aside our personal differences and just focus our energies on talking about what we need to do right now in order to survive and defeat the Pinnacle. Remember, nothing is above the Foundation's interests, so if you continue to be stubborn, you'll wind up losing everything, dying for nothing." Sebastian warned sternly as he gave Kevin a vicious stare down. In order to send a message, he then drew his spiritual energy toward his right palm, causing it to glow brightly. With this, Clarissa seemed even more straightforward as she took out her sword from her waist and waved it in front of her as a warning. With tensions rising between them, Dalton frowned and shook his head. He then cracked his knuckles and seemed ready to start fighting at any moment. However, Kevin didn't show any trace of fear on his face. Instead, his smile only grew wider and wider. At the same time, back at the Foundation's base camp, both Paul Vaughn and Jeffrey Bowie were frowning upon seeing this footage. Wayne Ford, who was standing next to them, had a gloomy expression on his face as well. "What are they talking about? It looks like they're having an animated discussion about something," Jeffrey Bowie asked, puzzled. "Why are you asking me? How should I know?" Paul Vaughn shrugged his shoulders as he focused his attention on Clarissa, who was his top student.
"Every second counts. They can't afford to waste any time arguing with each other."
Wayne Ford turned around and looked at them.
"Are they starting a fight with Kevin?"
Ever since they set foot on the island, Sebastian and the other two had been paying close attention to Kevin and Dalton. And now that they were working together, each and every one of their actions undoubtedly affected the nerves of the others. Despite what they had said earlier to try and assert themselves, they were well aware of how powerful Kevin truly was. And it wasn't an exaggeration to say that he was the strongest among the Foundation's younger generation. Sebastian, Clarissa, and Clyde were pegged as the future leaders of the three major schools. By following Kevin, would they have the greatest guarantee of survival? As such, this was the reason why Paul Vaughn, Jeffrey Bowie, and Wayne Ford had repeatedly reminded them to look for Kevin and team up with him. However, judging from what they were currently seeing on the monitor, everything seemed to be going against their wishes. With Sebastian Young and Clarissa Pratt only valuing Kevin for his herbalist skills, both he and Dalton felt like they were being looked down upon. This brought about a tense atmosphere between them. And with the four of them seeming about to fight at any moment, Paul Vaughn, Jeffrey Bowie, and Wayne Ford couldn't help but frown upon seeing this footage on their monitors. Since their students were pegged as the future leaders of their respective schools, they had previously instructed them to team up with Kevin to ensure their survival. However, the three old men wondered why Clarissa and Sebastian were seemingly going against their wishes and looking to start a conflict with Kevin.
Those kids are usually quite smart. What has gotten into them?
Jeffrey Bowie gritted his teeth and said in a low voice. He was extremely nervous in his heart.
I hope they don't let us down. The future of our schools depends on their survival.
With Clyde still unconscious, he felt the urge to participate in this battle himself instead of his students so that he could talk some sense into the other two.
They'd better come to their senses sooner than later.
Wayne Ford sighed with a serious face and shook his head. When Wayne Ford and Harley Shepard had heard enough, they stepped outside the tent for a moment to discuss in private.
Do you think that Calvin Morris is also looking for Kevin and the others?
Harley Shepard asked with a slight frown.
He isn't stupid. Under such circumstances, I don't think he would dare to do anything that goes against the entire Foundation. Otherwise, he won't be the only one who will suffer. If he gets caught, the entire Morris family will be targeted by thousands of people.
Wayne Ford shook his head lightly, but his eyes still revealed a strong sense of worry despite his words. Amidst the worries of the Foundation's leaders, the people observing in the Pinnacle's camp were also discussing what had just happened from their end.
Parker Ramirez is such an idiot. How could he let those people go with such a good opportunity to kill them?
A devilish woman put one hand on her waist in displeasure.
Don't be so hard on him. After all, he's still quite young, so the higher-ups don't expect him to do anything extraordinary. For now, he just needs to get rid of the unnecessary ants along the way.
The man beside her replied calmly. The two of them were the vanguards, Samantha Harris and Jesse Sanchez. Fighting on behalf of the Pinnacle, both of them had led the initial waves of forces that attacked the Foundation at the lake.
The Pinnacle is being too cautious. With our combined army of combat warriors and herbalist experts, we can easily overwhelm and defeat the Foundation. Why is there any need to do something this risky? Can we really trust the younger generation to decide the outcome of this war?
Samantha Harris whined with great dissatisfaction.
Be careful not to say anything that will disrupt the morale of our army. After all, you and I are both just generals of the vanguard. If we want to be promoted to the Pinnacle's main forces when this is over, we have to think twice about our words and actions.
Jesse Sanchez hesitated for a moment before he continued.
Besides, we don't really know what the higher-ups of the Pinnacle are thinking. It's not something that you and I can speculate about.
I know,
Samantha nodded and then bit her lips.
Babe, after this war is over, can we get married already?
Jesse Sanchez was obviously stunned when he heard that. He slowly came back to his senses and uttered,
We'll talk about it when the time comes.
Kevin, have you thought carefully about it? Will you come with us or not?
Sebastian Young slowly pulled out his sword and took 2 to 3 steps forward. He then drew his spiritual energy toward his sword and waved it around. If you continue to look down on us, I guess that we won't work well together after all. So maybe it's better for us to separate amicably, here, and go our separate ways. If fate allows it, we shall meet again in the end. How about that? Kevin raised his eyebrows and patted Dalton on the shoulder to get him to put down the fusion hammers in his hands. Clyde is still unconscious, so he can't help you fight right now. As such, even if I don't attack, Dalton alone could easily defeat the two of you. That being said, instead of wasting your time letting your egos get in the way, you might as well humble yourselves and listen to me. Hearing this, Dalton puffed out his chest with force and gave them a fierce look. Sebastian didn't feel threatened by this at all. He casually stroked the hair in front of his forehead and straightened his back even more to assert himself.
Kevin, although you have a higher power base and managed to beat us during the Healing Arts School's martial arts competition, I recall that you had a limited set of combat moves and only managed to win by a fluke. Do you really think that you can still defeat us both?
Sebastian spoke frankly without holding back. "You seem to be very confident in your own abilities." Kevin couldn't help but narrow his eyes slightly. While he could clearly feel that Sebastian and Clarissa's power bases had improved tremendously since their last encounter, it hadn't reached the point where it could threaten him. Instead, Kevin was more worried about who Sebastian and the other two actually represented. After all, the Central Alternative Healing Academy, the Southwest School of Healing, and the Southeast School for Natural Medicine were all famous schools within the Great Powers. Furthermore, Kevin had already fought with Wayne Ford, Paul Vaughn, and Jeffrey Bowie before. He couldn't deny that daring to provoke their anger had indeed caused him a lot of trouble. "Our confidence comes from the mastery of our own strength." Clarissa slowly raised the sword in her hand, which reflected a cold light on her face against the sun. "In that case, you highly underestimate ours as well. That being said, it seems like we have no choice but to settle this matter in a fight today." Kevin raised his eyebrows and patted Dalton's shoulder. "Dalton, you've been waiting for a chance to fight someone all day, right? Prepare to teach them a lesson. However, there's no need to kill them, so just exert enough effort to prove our point to the two of them." Kevin said these words in a very calm and relaxed manner, which made Clarissa and Sebastian even more furious.
"Finally, I won't let you down, Kevin. They're in for a surprise."
Dalton excitedly stretched his arms and shoulders a few times before bringing out his fusion hammers once again. With that, he then swiftly charged forward and swung both copper hammers towards them. Since this was their first time battling another level 5 warrior and encountering a weapon like the fusion hammers, Clarissa Pratt and Sebastian Young acted as if they were facing a very powerful enemy. Without any time to retreat, they immediately raised the swords in their hands and braced for impact. A second later, it was clear that their swords were no match as the fusion hammers struck them directly in their chests. This sent both Clarissa and Sebastian flying into the air, and the sound of their muffled groans could be heard from a distance. At the same time, Kevin yawned as he crossed his arms in front of his chest and leaned against a big tree. As soon as Dalton looked back at him with a huge smile on his face, he already knew the final result. Whether it was the skills that they had learned from the Central Alternative Healing Academy or the Southwest School of Healing, both Clarissa Pratt and Sebastian Young had mainly focused on formal training, which could sometimes be too predictable for their own good. However, what they didn't account for was that despite having initial doubts about his own skills due to a lack of training, Dalton had enough real fights in the outside world to gain an advantage over them. And with the fusion hammers in his possession, this had given him the extra confidence to fight without any trace of fear. Seeing such a scene, Paul Vaughn and Wayne Ford, who were watching from the Foundation's base camp, instantly furrowed their eyebrows.
"What exactly is going on between them? Why are they suddenly using weapons on each other?"
Wayne Ford grumbled.
"Unfortunately, the worst-case scenario might happen if this continued. It's exactly what we feared the most by bringing the 5 of them together."
Paul Vaughn clenched his fist tightly.
"What will we do about it?"
Harley Shepard was so anxious that beads of sweat were starting to form on his forehead.
"How can we attack the pinnacle at a time like this? And with footage for everyone to see from both camps, it's embarrassing that they're imploding in front of so many people."
Wayne Ford didn't answer his question. He just stared at the sky and shook his head.
"Kevin normally isn't the type to be such an unreasonable person. Could it be that the problem lies with Sebastian Young and Clarissa Pratt?"
Harley didn't realize that his words had hit the nail on the head. He suddenly turned his head to look at Wayne Ford, who was standing beside him. While he remained quiet on the outside, he was clearly upset with the situation as his eyes were filled with rage. At the same time, Sebastian and Clarissa were wincing in pain after crashing to the ground with a heavy thud. Both of them spit up some blood from the impact. Dalton put away his fusion hammers and slowly walked over to them.
"Looks like the two of you aren't that good after all. How dare you insult us and then put on such a pathetic display?"
Dalton sneered coldly at them. Kevin told Sebastian Young that they could either go their separate ways amicably, or he, Clarissa Pratt, and Clyde Davis could humble themselves enough to follow him. However, Sebastian and Clarissa continued to mock their combat skills, prompting Kevin to ask Dalton to teach them a lesson. After seeing Dalton strike both Sebastian and Clarissa with his fusion hammers, Paul Vaughn, Wayne Ford, and Harley Shepard were upset and embarrassed with how things had seemingly taken a turn for the worse between their students. While Sebastian and Clarissa were wincing in pain, Dalton walked over and sneered at them for insulting their abilities earlier, but having nothing to show for it. You were hiding your true strength all this time at the Healing Arts School? The calmness on Sebastian Young's face had been replaced by complete shock. Weren't you looking down on us earlier for our lack of experience? Well, it's our turn to look down on your abilities now. Serves you right for underestimating us. Dalton Steele's tone was full of sarcasm. Looking at the two men, Kevin shook his head. He felt uneasy about the whole situation and believed that he and Dalton had already made their point clear to them. Dalton, that's enough. Don't waste your breath on them. Anyway, it's getting late, so we should leave. Kevin looked serious, as if he didn't want to stay here any longer. Kevin, how can we let them go so easily? Don't you remember how arrogant these two were just a few moments ago? I don't think they've learned their lesson yet. Dalton rubbed his palms together, showing no intention of leaving. What else is there to talk about? We just needed to teach them a lesson. There's no need to waste our time and energy with them any further. Kevin was obviously very anxious. He pulled Dalton's shoulder and motioned for them to leave. But just as they were about to turn around, Sebastian suddenly took a deep breath and forced himself to stand up from the ground. Kevin, don't be such a hypocrite. If you have the guts, why didn't you kill the two of us right now? Stop pretending as if you developed a guilty conscience all of a sudden. Hearing this, Kevin remarked without turning his head. I never care what other people think when I do things, so it doesn't matter to me whether you think I'm being sincere or hypocritical. Either way, you lost this fight, so it's your choice whether you want to keep living or not. I'm moving forward, and the battle isn't over yet. But if you die at the hands of the Pinnacle, don't blame me for not saving you. You don't need to worry about whether I'll die or not, Kevin. Anyway, I doubt that you'd be able to kill us today. If you do and you're lucky enough to get off this island alive, you'll surely regret it. Due to Sebastian being so agitated, he spat out a stream of blood halfway through his sentence. Tell me, why would I regret it? Kevin suddenly became curious as he turned around and slightly raised his head to ask. Why don't you take a guess? I'll give you a clue. Who do you care about the most in your life? Sebastian gave him a mischievous smile. When his voice fell, Kevin was suddenly stunned. There were only a few people that he cared about. His parents were protected by experts from the Radiance. Aside from that, Adriana Wright and the other people in his trusted circle were probably under the protection of Xavier Marshall and his men by now. The only one that he hadn't accounted for was Lily, who was currently still in a coma at the hospital. What are you getting at? Kevin's tone suddenly became serious. What's going on, Kevin? Dalton asked in a daze. However, Kevin didn't answer his question. He continued to stare at Sebastian Young and slowly clenched his fists. I'm giving you one last chance to tell me. Don't test me. Kevin narrowed his eyes with violent intent. Did I finally provoke you? You've been calm all this time, so I really want to see what you're like when you're angry. Sebastian dared him fearlessly. Clarissa Pratt placed her hands underneath her body and slowly got up from the ground and leaned against a big tree, saying, Kevin, if you kill us now, I'm sure that she'll soon be buried with us as well. After all, if the entire Foundation sees this, they'll cast you as a traitor for slaughtering your teammates and believe that you've joined the Pinnacle. When she finished speaking, Dalton finally understood what they were thinking. However, before he could react, Kevin had already made a move. He stepped on Sebastian's shoulder with force, causing his chest to cave in quite a bit. "Are you sure I won't dare to kill you?" Kevin's tone had completely turned cold. "As I said, if you have the guts, then kill me already. I'm not afraid to tell you that as long as I die, your wife will never live to see another day." Sebastian's face was covered in blood, but he continued to taunt him arrogantly. Kevin took a deep breath as he tried to control his temper. To be honest, he really wanted to kill Sebastian right at that moment. If he didn't get rid of him as soon as possible, he was sure that there would be endless trouble between them in the future. But although Kevin wasn't afraid of Sebastian or even the entirety of the Southwest School of Healing, there were still many people around him who didn't have the strength to defend themselves against them. Furthermore, the biggest problem was just what Clarissa Pratt had said. If Kevin attacked now, he was afraid that he would have to bear the responsibility of being called a traitor for the rest of his life. As such, no matter how much he would try to explain himself to the Foundation, no one would be willing to believe him or fully trust him ever again. "What do you want?" Kevin didn't remove his leg from Sebastian Young's shoulder and asked with a condescending tone. "What are you asking us for? Don't you want to kill us, Kevin? Why are you suddenly so afraid?" Clarissa asked with a laugh. "Come on, let's see that temper of yours." "What's the matter with you?" In a fit of anger, Kevin couldn't help but wave his palm and release a strong wave of spiritual energy at her chest. Clarissa Pratt instantly flew backward and broke a few trees along the way before she finally fell to the ground. With blood flowing out of her nose, she fainted shortly thereafter. "I'm asking you one last time. What do you want?" Kevin asked again. "I want you to be my servant. Are you willing to trade your wife's life for it?" Although Sebastian was currently being stepped on, he still had a lot of confidence in his words. "What the hell? This guy is too arrogant. He'll definitely start behaving after I hit him again," Dalton said as he angrily took out his fusion hammers again. Watching this scene from their monitor, the other leaders of the Foundation couldn't help but whisper amongst each other. "What's going on? Such a crucial moment isn't the time for them to settle their personal scores." One of the leaders shook her head in disappointment. "That seems to be the top student of the Southwest School of Healing, Sebastian Young. I heard that he's always so composed and his power base is also very high," another pointed out. "It seems like he was ambushed by someone. Who is that person standing on top of him? Is he from the Pinnacle?" A third one gasped. After all, outside of the Healing Arts School, Kevin had never been seen anywhere else within the Great Powers. So despite his reputation, the number of leaders present who had actually seen his face in person could be counted on one hand. However, Wayne, Ford, and the others kept their thoughts to themselves at that moment as their brows were almost knitted together in silence. Despite seeing the footage on screen, none of them could figure out what had happened between Kevin and his teammates. What was he so angry about? At the same time, in the hall of the Swinton family's mansion in St. Louis, Catherine Swinton was sitting in a chair and looking at Thornton Huxley, who was kneeling on the ground with a complicated expression on his face.
"Did you poison them?"
Richard Swinton wiped the sword in his hand with a piece of cloth. "Father, the matter hasn't been thoroughly investigated yet. Why are you in such a hurry to accuse Thornton?" Brenda Swinton asked with some reluctance. 3 hours ago, Susan Williams had apparently been poisoned by something she ate during breakfast. As she now lay sick in her room, the entire Swinton family's mansion had been placed under lockdown to find the culprit. Under Spencer's leadership, the people of the Radiance had already surrounded the entire compound and started interrogating everyone one by one. And until they found out who did it, nobody was safe from being a suspect, including the Swinton family. After previously threatening to kill Alan and Susan Williams just the other day, the most suspicious person at the moment was naturally Thornton Huxley. However, without any concrete evidence, Richard Swinton couldn't say for certain whether it was really him who had poisoned Susan.
"Mr. Swinton,
I wouldn't dare lie to you. I really didn't do it." Thornton lowered his head and denied any involvement in the incident.
"Do you expect me to believe you right away after the stunt you pulled the other day?"
Richard raised his eyebrows and slowly turned his head back to look at Brenda.
"You've been watching over him these past few days. Did he do it? You should know very well in your heart if he did, right?"
Brenda didn't know what to say. "Father,
Brenda, don't lie to me. This matter concerns the life and death of the entire Swinton family. Don't you dare do something that you'll regret for the rest of your life just because you feel sorry for him."
Richard waved his hand and interrupted her. After Susan Williams had been mysteriously poisoned during breakfast, the entire Swinton family's mansion was placed under lockdown by the Radiants. With everyone being treated as a possible suspect, Richard Swinton confronted Thornton Huxley. But despite being the most likely culprit after previously attempting to kill Alan and Susan Williams, Thornton denied his involvement this time. Since his daughter Brenda had been watching over Thornton for the past few days, Richard asked her whether he was guilty or not. He then warned her not to lie just because she felt sorry for Thornton. Brenda Swinton felt like a fishbone was stuck in her throat and couldn't speak. After spending a lot of time with Thornton these past few days, the relationship between the two of them was indeed much closer than before. Although Brenda didn't openly accept what Thornton had previously done against Kevin and her family, she also considered everything else that had happened to him recently. Since the annihilation of the Huxley family, Thornton had turned from a young heir of a wealthy family into a stray dog in an instant. Knowing that this was the main reason why he sought revenge, this matter had caused waves in Brenda Swinton's heart.
"Mr. Swinton, you don't have to pressure Brenda into speaking anymore. I can assure you that I had nothing to do with what happened to Susan Williams earlier. After so many years, you should know me by now. If it was really me who had done it, I would have definitely done it the same way I did last time."
Upon saying these words, Thornton immediately pursed his lips and straightened his back. He didn't want to appear too disheveled in front of Richard Swinton. This might be his only attribute that reminded others of his previous status as the young heir of the Huxley family. Thornton then looked at Brenda and continued,
"I would never poison someone behind their back. This kind of despicable act is beneath me. I've already heard enough from you, so there's no need to keep explaining yourself with regard to this matter. Besides, don't think that I've forgotten your offenses against not only the Swinton family, but also the Radiants and Kevin."
Richard kept staring into Thornton's eyes as if he wanted to see them twitch to catch him lying.
"Mr. Swinton, you can't be serious, right? I already told you that I'm innocent."
Thornton had never acted so tough in front of Richard. At this point, it was obvious that the destruction of the Huxley family had caused a change in Thornton Huxley's temperament, especially when his anger was provoked more than just a little bit.
"As I said before, you're the prime suspect, so if you are in fact guilty, I must do everything that I can to get you to admit it."
Richard slowly narrowed his eyes.
"After I'm done with you, that's the only point at which I'll look for other possible suspects. I won't stop until I find out who did this."
Hearing this, Thornton gave him a disdainful look.
"I can't let you frame me for something that I didn't do." "You seem to have a lot of confidence in your words."
Richard noticed the change in Thornton's tone and suddenly had a very bad feeling in his heart.
"Anything is possible. Don't you think so, Mr. Swinton?"
Thornton sneered back at him. Just as the two of them were in a deadlock, a staff member rushed into the room. He immediately knelt down on one knee and lowered his head to Richard Swinton. "Mr. Swinton, we've just confirmed that Mrs. Williams was poisoned with yellow cobra poison," the staff member reported.
"What did you just say?"
Richard was stunned for a moment, then quickly came back to his senses. He grabbed the staff member's shirt, lifted him up from the ground, and glared at him in disbelief. The doctor said Mrs. Williams' food had traces of yellow cobra poison all over it," the staff member replied with a stutter.
"It can't be."
Richard's hands were trembling nonstop. He threw the staff member to the ground and stumbled a few steps back to lean against the wall. The atmosphere in the room suddenly became very cold. Almost everyone knew that the yellow cobra poison was one of the deadliest poisons produced by the Zucker family. However, it was also known that of everyone in the entire Zucker family, Frida Zucker was the only one who could concoct this type of poison. Therefore, there was no need to investigate the identity of the person who poisoned her, as Richard Swinton had already determined the real culprit.
"Mr. Swinton, are you still planning to try and frame me for this?"
Thornton asked with an arrogant smile. However, there was a somber look in the depths of his eyes. It was just that no one else had noticed it.
"Frida Zucker must pay for this."
Richard took a few deep breaths and clenched his fists. "Richard, don't be so impulsive." Catherine Swinton instantly sensed that he was up to something. She quickly walked up to him and held his arm with her hand.
"Let go of me. Frida Zucker jeopardized all of our lives by daring to poison someone under my roof. Today she must face the consequences for her actions."
Richard roared angrily. "This matter has yet to be confirmed, so don't let your emotions affect your decisions. After all, the Zucker family isn't an ordinary power. You have to think about everything carefully before making a move." Catherine tried her best to dissuade him. Richard only stopped when he heard this. Although the Zucker family's current strength couldn't be compared to the Swinton family, Frida Zucker's reputation in St. Louis had been very strong in recent years. With the two of them helping each other, it would indeed take a lot of effort for the Swinton family to eliminate her in one go.
"Then what do you think that we should do? Alan has done us a great favor by saving your life many years ago. If something were to happen to him or his wife in our home, how can we live with that shame?"
Richard closed his eyes and tried his best to calm himself. "Go and inform the people of the Radiance first, then try to contact Kevin. If you really want to deal with the Zucker family, you have to get him back here in St. Louis." Catherine was not just a supportive wife, but a sensible and wise decision-maker in her own right. She had thought of all of this in such a short period of time.
"All right."
Richard patted the back of Catherine's hand. Just as he took 2 steps forward, he turned around and gave Thornton Huxley a meaningful look. When their eyes met, Thornton's heart suddenly skipped a beat, but he forced himself to hold his breath and not let Richard see any change in emotion. However, Richard Swinton didn't say anything to him. He simply let out another deep breath, then left the room to go speak with the people of the Radiance. Back at the island, Kevin was holding on to Sebastian Young's hair and kept throwing him against a tree trunk with force over and over. "I already gave you a way out, but you still refused it. Even if I give you another chance now, I'm sure you won't be up to any good." Kevin nagged as he rammed Sebastian into the tree once more.
"Kevin, just give me a quick death already. Otherwise, you won't only have to worry about the Foundation getting their hands on your wife. I'll personally make sure that both of your lives will be used to atone for what you've done to me today."
Sebastian responded as best he could despite struggling for breath. "We can discuss that if you're able to live past today." Kevin said this without any change in expression, but his hands exerted more and more strength each time he picked Sebastian back up and threw him into the tree.
"Kevin!"
Dalton Steele threw Clarissa Pratt on the ground and wiped the blood on his face. Kevin glanced at Dalton and understood what he meant by calling him. Knowing that he couldn't let himself get too carried away with punishing Sebastian, he quickly let go of him and stepped on his back.
"Is that all you've got, Kevin? Now that you've attacked me, it's already too late. Whether you can survive the rest of this battle or not, you won't have any chance of turning the tables and redeeming yourself in the eyes of the Foundation."
Sebastian seemed like he was determined to get the last laugh despite his miserable state. "Like I said, You don't need to worry about this." Before he could finish his sentence, Kevin suddenly turned around. His eyes shone with a dazzling light. "Since you're already here, why are you still hiding in the dark? Come out here and play." Dalton's eyes widened when he heard this. He then gulped in a panic when he felt the tip of a sword touching the back of his neck.
"I never thought that the people of the Foundation would end up killing each other under such circumstances. What a dumb move on their leaders' part to trust their younger generation to work together in this battle,"
a voice suddenly rang out. A second later, 5 or 6 figures quickly emerged from the woods.